Hello, I'm continuing my reviews on the Friday the 13th series with Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, and I'm joined by my friend Chris Espianl. Now, this came out in 1993, and this is the 9th film in the Friday the 13th franchise. This time around, the film was co-written and directed by Adam Marcus. Now, I already reviewed this along with all the other Friday the 13th movies all the way back in 2011 for Season 1 of Horror Month. Those reviews are still up, however, they're no longer public. They're now marked as unlisted, but you can still see them on the Horror Month Season 1 playlist, which I will leave a link to in the description below. And I recently did new reviews on the first 8 Friday the 13th movies, which you could see on the playlist for Horror Month Season 13. Now, Jason Goes to Hell was the first film in the franchise to be produced by New Line Cinema. Prior to this, the first 8 movies were put out by Paramount, but after Friday the 13th Part 8 underperformed, Paramount basically wanted to wash their hands of the franchise because they were always kind of embarrassed by the series, so they sold the rights to New Line Cinema, and New Line put this movie out, and it's funny that it's called The Final Friday, because it almost seems like this was intended to be the final film, yet if you watch the movie, it's clear they were trying to make this almost like a soft reboot, and it's clear they wanted to make more sequels sort of in the line of this movie. But what do you think of Jason Goes to Hell?
I watched it a few times before. When I was younger, it was you're going to hear this, everybody says the same thing. It's the least favorite one. But now, watching it, I kind of like it. I didn't give it that much credit because I was such a fan of the character. And the mere fact that character wasn't shown, and it was just a body swap, But, that was me younger. Me watching this now, it's Jason all the way. And, to be honest with you, I appreciate it more now. The story is more clearer to me. I have to say, Jason's a lot more cunning in this movie than he was in other movies. Yeah, I enjoyed this one. I actually have a different opinion on it now.
And you see, I always liked this one. This was actually my first Friday the 13th movie. I first saw this when I was 9 years old. So seeing this for the first time at the age of 9, not seeing the other movies, in my head, Jason hopping bodies, I guessed at that age, oh, that must be a normal thing for this franchise. I guess he's done it in other movies. I didn't realize this movie was such a radical departure for the rest of the series. But because this was my first Friday the 13th movie, I do have a soft spot in my heart for this one. And to be honest with you, I do like this one a lot. I think it's a really unique entry in the franchise, especially because the most common criticism of the Friday the 13th movies is that they're formulaic and that each movie is basically the same plot repeated. So the fact that this one does something so different with the storyline, I think, whether it turned out good or bad, I think that's at least to be commended.
And that's exactly what I came to appreciate now that I saw it. Because I was thinking about it as I was watching it. I was like, to tell you the truth, every single one follows the same formula. You don't really care about any of the characters.
And you see, I do disagree with that. I think the earlier Friday the 13th films have likable characters. I mean, Tommy Jarvis.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, this one is more unique. You at least know that they were trying to do something a little different.
The only thing I don't like about this one, because I'll admit, I kind of take the continuity of this series maybe a little more serious than I should, but I don't like how it doesn't really connect that well to the end of Part 8. There's no explanation for how Jason came back after being melted by toxic waste acid in the sewers of Manhattan in Part 8. It doesn't explain how he came back or how he made it from New York back to Crystal Lake. Supposedly there is either a comic book series or a novelization that actually explains the gap between the two movies, but a lot of people assume this one is just set in its own continuity. Again, as somebody who does take the continuity of these films a little more seriously than I should, I like to think this one is still being canon with the rest of the franchise, but that is the one thing I'm not the biggest fan of, is how this one almost seems to retcon certain things.
Yeah, because I do know that in the New Blood, they did explain the transition between that movie to Part 8. So you do find out how he gets it, but I didn't really think about, like, how the hell he got back to Crystal Lake from that point on.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if the filmmakers thought about that.
Yeah, and how yeah, it was, exactly, and the toxic waste. I didn't know. Yeah, I wasn't really thinking. I thought of it as, like, episodic. Like, he does this in this movie, he does this in this movie. It's kind of like,
yeah,
you know, I'm more loose to the canon. You know what I mean? I think it fits in the canon, you know, but I don't really know what which really qualifies the canon. Is the first 3 movies canon and the rest not, or I just view it as one joyride and they're all canon.
All right. So, the plot of Jason Goes to Hell is it's set presumably sometime after the events of Friday the 13th Part 8. It begins at Crystal Lake, and we follow this woman who we eventually learn is actually an FBI decoy. It turns out the government knows about Jason, and they sent an FBI Special Unit Task Force to take Jason out. And this is where you could possibly connect this more to Part 8, because of Jason's actions in Manhattan in the previous film, maybe that's how the government now knows about him. But long story short, this FBI Special Unit Task Force kills Jason. They don't just kill Jason, they blow him the fuck up. So basically, after they kill Jason, what's left of Jason's body is sent to a morgue, and you have this coroner doctor examining his body, and this is where it's revealed that Jason is actually a kind of a demon, and I guess the spirit of Jason somehow causes the doctor to eat Jason's heart, and then the doctor becomes possessed by Jason. And in the movie, we learn that all this time Jason had a sister. I guess you're supposed to assume that at a certain point, Elias Voorhees, Jason's father, left Pamela, possibly after Jason drowned as a child, and he might have started a new family or something, but basically Jason all this time had a half-sister named Diana. So Jason is possessing different people, but in order to become reborn, he needs to possess the body of a blood relative of his, which is why he's going after Diana at first. But before Jason can possess Diana, he's stopped by Steven, the ex-boyfriend of Diana's daughter. So Jason kills Diana, and then Steven is accused of the crime. So now Jason is going after Diana's daughter, Jessica, as well as her and Steven's daughter. So, with the help of an eccentric bounty hunter named Creighton Duke, Steven escapes from jail and now must protect Jessica and his daughter from Jason. Now, I do want to briefly touch on the timeline of this movie in context of the rest of the series. Now, I established in my review of Friday the 13th Part 7 that because of how long that's set after the events of Part 6, technically, even though that movie came out in the late 80s, technically that film is set in either 1999 or 2000, which would set Jason Takes Manhattan in either 2000 or 2001. So when we get to this movie, again, if we want to take the continuity seriously, which I know the filmmakers weren't, but just for the sake of being a nerd, that would set this movie in maybe 2002 or 2003. Now, the film stars John D. LeMay as Stephen Freeman, who is basically the main protagonist of the film. Now, John D. LeMay was also in Friday the 13th, the series, playing a different character. You also have Kari Keegan as Jessica, who is Diana's daughter and Jason's niece. And she's the secondary protagonist and basically our final girl. You also have Erin Gray as Diana. You also have Stephen Culp as Robert Campbell, who in the movie is the host of a true crime show called American Case File, and we learn that he's actually dating Jessica, and he ends up being kind of the secondary antagonist of the film, and he ends up getting possessed by Jason throughout most of the film. You also have Leslie Jordan in a small but memorable role as one of the cooks at this diner. And then you have Stephen Williams, who absolutely steals the movie as Creighton Duke. But what do you think of the characters in Jason Goes to Hell, like Stephen, the main character, or Creighton Duke?
I like Creighton Duke. He's a off the wall character, very charismatic. The other one, Stephen.
Yeah.
I like him. I think he's a well-balanced character, but it's hard to take him serious because he's a little bit of a goofball at the same time.
But that's what I like about it. I like how, in a way, he's the kind of character who in any other Friday the 13th movie would have been killed, yet he's the hero of the movie. And what do you think of Jessica, Jason's niece?
I like the character. She's alright for what she was playing as. But Steve is the one that did it for me, man. I just, he's the character that you would think the least that would go through the trouble of what he's going through. You know what I mean? Like, it takes a lot of... He doesn't seem like the type of character that is willing to take the amount of pain just to get the information he needed to get. Yeah. And I guess that showed Duke the amount of heart that he had, that he's like, all right, I'm going to throw you a freebie. So... And from there, I'm like, all right, I started to take that character a little seriously. I like his dynamic relationship with his childhood friend, who's the officer. I forgot his name.
Oh yeah, the deputy who he's friends with. Yeah, that was a fun scene where like he comes to arrest him and then just punches him out, and they start beating the crap out of each other. And then they're sitting against the car, and he's like, "Get in the car, Steven. You get in the car. I have a gun. Fuck that. I have a gun." And that's the thing. I do like the characters in this movie, and I think the character dynamics are actually relatively well written. Yeah. Like, for a Friday the 13th movie, this has, in my opinion, some pretty memorable characters.
Yeah, like, I'm not gonna lie, like, this is just me, but in other movies... There are a few characters that I care about in the other movies, but not so much. But in this one, I genuinely kind of like, hey, I hope these guys don't die. I hope that character doesn't die. I kind of like that character. He's colorful. I think there's more color to these characters. That's why I kind of enjoy them a lot more. You know what I mean? And their personalities is a testament to it, just their relationship, their personality.
Now, in the movie, Jason is once again played by Kane Hodder, who played Jason in Part 7 and Part 8 right before this, and I actually really like the makeup for Jason. Like, I really like this look for him. Like, I don't mind, like, the lumpy head or anything. Like, I don't know, it's kind of...
formation.
Yeah, like, I don't mind that. I like his look in this movie. But, of course, that was one of people's biggest criticisms of the film, is you don't actually see Jason that much in the movie, because throughout the film, Jason is possessing different bodies. But I don't mind that, like, I like this sort of different take on the storyline. I don't mind this idea that Jason is actually this demon worm that's hopping from body to body. Like, I know for a Friday the 13th movie, especially if you're seeing this at the time, knowing what you saw before, it might seem, like, completely random. Yeah. But, I mean, come on, a few movies before this, you had Jason battling a girl with telekinesis, so they already introduced the fact that the supernatural exists in this universe, so making Jason a demon all of a sudden... really doesn't bother me.
Kane Hodder also had a small appearance in the movie out of makeup as a security guard.
It's sort of implied that perhaps after Jason died as a child, Pamela Voorhees used black magic to bring Jason back, and in the movie, you see a copy of the Necronomicon. Not the Necronomicon from H.P. Lovecraft stories, but specifically the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead movies, implying that this is in the same universe as Evil Dead, and implying that Jason might be a Deadite.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think of that plot point?
Hey, listen, if they could have, I wish they could have pushed that together. You know, we could have had like at least two different movies, or one movie with a three-way battle collage between, you know, three iconic characters in the horror genre.
Yeah.
They had a nice setup there.
I mean, it technically doesn't explain why in the earlier Friday the 13th sequels Jason came off as more human, but my interpretation is that after Jason died as a child, Pamela somehow found out about the Necronomicon and found out that there was a passage in it that can raise the dead. But in order for it to work, there needed to be some sacrifices, which is why she became a serial killer, but she didn't realize that there needed to be a final sacrifice, which was her. So when Alice killed her at the end of the first movie, that's what officially brought Jason back. But because the Necronomicon can fuck around with time and space, Jason basically came back as a human and came back as a full-grown adult, basically at the age he would have been had he not died as a child, and that's why in the earlier films he's more human-like, but I think after getting hurt a few times, that's when some of his superhuman strength and some of his healing factor might have kicked in, and then after Tommy Jarvis killed him that first time, I feel like that's what he needed to be killed a few times in order for the demon side of him to officially kick in. And again, this is all my headcanon and all my personal fan theory stuff, but that's sort of my way of kind of trying to explain some of the plot holes of the earlier films and kind of try to explain why Jason went from just being sort of a hillbilly in the woods to this invincible zombie and eventually this invincible demon. And technically this is a spoiler, but at the end of the movie, Freddy Krueger shows up, or technically just Freddy's hand, but I remember when I saw this at the age of 9, keep in mind this was before Freddy vs. Jason, that just blew me the fuck away. I was like, what? You mean they're in the same universe?
Yeah, I had the same feeling when I heard about it, and then when I actually saw it, I was pretty astounded. And then my father, who's seen the movie, he told me during the time that he was watching it, like everybody that he knew was like talking about, hey, they're gonna meet up with each other. There's gonna be this. There's gonna be that. So, you know, it's pretty cool that they set that up. You know, and then we did eventually get that movie. You know, we have one more Friday the 13th movie, but we did eventually get Freddy vs. Jason. And again, we got so many Easter eggs on Jason Goes to Hell. We got the Necronomicon. We have the snakes. Don't they look similar to the ones that affected Freddy?
Oh, you mean the dream demons?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe there's a connection there that you could make.
You know, I remember my father was talking about, and he mentions that.
Now, before I end this video, I just want to cut to a clip of my late friend Chris Mano giving his thoughts on this movie. This was taken from a retrospective that we did on the Friday the 13th franchise back in 2018.
This one, I feel, is a lot like 8 and 5. Like, people give it a lot of shit, but, you know, the idea in it was really unique. The idea that, like, he would pass from body to body, and it was an attempt to really try to shake things up and try to do something different with the franchise, because, like, for example, the opening scene where they just, like, blow Jason to hell. I mean, when you think about it, if they hear that there's this dude stalking a campsite and everybody that goes there dies, it would be inevitable, you know, if you try to add realism to this. So clearly, like, they had their heads in the game. There are some elements of it that don't really work, but I think it does deserve a lot of credit, more credit than it gets. And I do love the cameo appearance of the Necronomicon in one scene, because I'm a diehard Evil Dead fan, so that was a nice shout out for them to do.
Here's my friend John's review of Jason Goes to Hell.
Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, the 9th movie in the Friday the 13th series. How much lame recorded can you get? After 8 movies, I'm just burnt out at this point with the series. But I've gotten this far, I might as well see the series all the way through, and I can't cheat this. Yes, Christian, I know you like this movie. For me, this movie killed the series, is one of the weakest and one of the worst one of the series. I am not a fan of this movie. Did not like the idea that Jason was blown up and was transformed into different bodies. Jason was barely in the movie. That opening felt like something to the ending of the movie, but no, it was the opening scene. This movie came out in the 90s when people were burnt out with the series at this point in time. Not a good time to be a Jason Voorhees fan. At this point in time, it was the 9th Friday the 13th movie. What else could they have done at this point with the series? With Paramount owning the rights to Jason Voorhees, they sold the rights to New Line Cinema. They were also tricking us saying this will be the last one of the series. Yeah, right. We all know that turned out in part 4. That's like saying this would be my last cigarette, but instead you still have a hard time to quit smoking. It was also cool to see Kane Hodder outside of makeup, but watch how we say Kane in front of Jason. It's sad Kane Hodder took a backseat in this movie, was barely in the movie as Jason. His look as Jason, his small screen time he has in this movie, the back of his head looks like a big giant meatball that exploded. Also, they don't explain how Jason Survivor came back from New York City, came back to Camp Crystal Lake. I know there's a comic book that explains this, but I never read that comic. I read when this movie came out, they sold the comic book on its opening night. If you hated this movie, at least you got a comic book. The comic book was probably better than this movie, possibly. It grossed me out when the coroner, played by Richard Grant, eats Jason's heart. To eat Jason's heart or not to eat Jason's heart? We all know which direction he goes in. The character Crane felt like they were going for a Dr. Loomis type character. This guy appears out of nowhere, and we never saw him in any of the previous Friday the 13th movies. I read that originally this part was offered to Tony Todd. Now that could have been awesome. I love Tony Todd. They were also going the Halloween route. If Jason killed all his family relatives' bloodline, he will die. Why didn't Jason have any other family blood relatives that we have not heard or been aware of or seen the last Friday movies? It makes no sense. I hate it when they do that. When the demon-worm Jason goes into other bodies, the part when he shaves the deputy's beard, since when did Jason care about appearances? It's not like he was posing for GQ magazine or being voted sexiest man alive. Despite not liking this movie, the one positive thing I will say is when Jason Demon Worm goes inside a new body, the old body dies, they feel like David Cronenberg grossed out body horror special effects. I wish I was talking about a David Cronenberg film right now instead of this movie. The part when Jason kills those 2 campers having sex in the tent, this is one of the goriest kills of the movie I've ever seen in the series. Jason stabs the girl while she's having sex on top of a guy, doing the cowgirl sex position, and then she gets split in half like bread. Finally, the MPAA took a vacation. We got to see the gross out special effects kills. The only thing about watching this movie sets up Freddy vs. Jason. When you see Freddy's hand pop up and grab Jason's mask, it was not Robert Englund as Freddy in this scene, it was Kane Hodder's hand. But sadly, because of this movie's failure, Freddy vs. Jason was postponed, not made until 10 years later. Again, another Easter egg. The Necronomicon book from Evil Dead is in this movie. How about that? Because later on, even though they never made Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, but they made the comic books later. It's like they were trying to get our hopes up that they were going to set up a cinematic universe where they have Freddy, Jason, Pinhead, Michael Myers, and Ash from Evil Dead, where they all like meet up and like fight. Clash of the Titans, or Slash of the Titans. Back in August, around my birthday month, I did a YouTube video on movies that came out the year I was born, 1993, and I forgot to mention this one. This one does not do it for me. It's stupid, dumb, junk, a mess, and doesn't get any better for me no matter how many times I rewatch it to try to like this movie. Anytime I rewatch this movie, my brain shuts down, not caring about the story. It's like they had no idea what they wanted this movie to be. Another movie with potential, but it failed.
Here are Joey's thoughts on Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday.
Friday the 13th Part 9, Jason Goes to Hell, is another cool movie in the franchise, in my opinion. It's like Part 8, or like Halloween 3. It's something different in the series again. Not just a campsite, it's like Jason goes into one's bodies and something like that, but it's cool. And the guy that played Duke, he's another awesome fucking character into in this movie. And the guy that his name is John, the one that was in Friday the 13th series from the 80s, he's also in this. The ending too was a cool scene. I love that part, like when Freddy's glove pulls Jason's mask on the ground. That's another fucking awesome that was really cool. And they have some deleted scenes too. I think they should leave the deleted scenes in, like they did with Part 7, but unfortunately they don't. To me, they should have left them in my opinion. There's also an unrated version of this movie, which is really fucking cool too. I have that, and I've seen the one that's rated R, but the one that's unrated is much better. But yeah, I recommend Jason Goes to Hell to check it out. But yeah, like I said, I recommend this to check out Jason Goes to Hell.
And here are my friend Jeremy's thoughts on Friday the 13th Part 9.
Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, is another entry in the series that I'm not too crazy about. I really don't like the idea of Jason possessing people, but that's just me. The movie starts off with Jason being ambushed by a bunch of FBI and SWAT agents and being blown to smithereens. It's never explained how he came back after being reverted to a child at the end of Part 8, which is disappointing. But okay, Jason's back and gets blown up. His remains are taken to a morgue, where one of the morticians is enticed to eat Jason's heart, which causes him to be possessed by Jason. And from there, Jason goes about jumping from one body to another. At one point, you see Jason as some sort of demonic creature crawling out of someone's neck, and there's also a mystical dagger involved. It's all pretty ridiculous. Kane Hodder returns as Jason during the brief time you see Jason as Jason, and he also has a cameo role as a security guard, which is cool. John D. LeMay stars as Steve Freeman, who's trying to save Jason's niece, Jessica Kimball, from Jason, who needs to be reborn through a Voorhees. There's also Creighton Duke, a bounty hunter who has an encyclopedia-like knowledge of Jason. How he knows all this stuff about Jason is anybody's guess. Jason's look in this movie is pretty cool. The hockey mask is melded into his face, which is a perfectly gruesome look. It's interesting that John D. LeMay stars in this, since he also starred in Friday the 13th, the series. Anyway, I'll wrap up here. I'm not too fond of this entry in the series.
So yeah, that was our review of Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. Our next movie review will be on Jason X.